that kind of then morphed over with the advent of general systems theory becoming more popular. We began to talk about systems renewal, organization systems renewal, and that's where that language came from. Because he saw out there that we couldn't just talk about organization like we're thinking about structures and people. They really are a combination of systems interlinked, and that's because of general systems theory. That's was his thinking, and so I think that was a great contribution, which lives today, obviously, right here, thanks to him. Obviously, he was a whole systems thinker, and you mentioned that. The other thing, I think that Gordon was very much dedicated to the consultative model of influence. That is, leadership without official clout. And he and a guy by the name of Leslie Thiss were asked by the American Society for Training and Development to put some pamphlets together, or some writing together on consulting skills. There wasn't anything at that time. You know, Bloch and Petrella hadn't started their practice yet, or they were in the early stages, and there really wasn't anybody else doing anything. And so they started to put this together, and it was about that time that I got to work with them. And so they started to ask me for input from a practical perspective. You know, what does it really look like out there in the real world kind of thing. And so that's how the whole consulting skills book got written. And then BJ helped edit it.
Yes.
So Ron and Gordon and BJ and I had inputs to that book. I don't claim any editorship or ownership of that, but we did. We had a lot, because we did a lot of workshops before the book was ever written, based on that. So I think that was a great contribution he made. Future-based strategic planning, Ron, I think was a contribution he made. He popularized that. I know we did a number of those around in the state of Washington for the educational system. We had workshops all around the state with large groups of people, diverse groups, whole systems in the room. We didn't call it that at that time, but that's what we were doing. It was large systems intervention. And Ron and Eva Schindler-Raymond were doing that. I think engaging all systems in a change effort, and we've all, have all the liars in one room, he used to say. And practical models of organizational change. You mentioned something I had forgotten about and I wanted to say. Gordon's book on modeling, Visualizing Change, was the name of the book. I still think is a classic. It's not in print anymore. I still have a copy of it. But it is a classic, and it is about that thick, and it's got every kind of model you can think about. Just all these examples, all these wonderful. Clayton, you remember seeing that and working with it. And that was a great contribution, I thought. And I know it had a terrific impact on me. And now we're getting into our
Well, let me just make one other comment about Gordon.
Yeah.
And the idea that he comes up with lots of ideas. He did come up with an idea of creating the Giraffe Society.
Yeah.
And the goal was to make sure that we always stuck our neck out. And he actually had cups prepared, and he actually did a couple keynotes on the Giraffe Society and how we had to be willing to have the courage of our convictions, do it in a way that's acceptable, and obviously will move things forward. But he had felt that some of our profession had gotten too conservative and weren't really pushing organizations to make the change that they should.
That's one I had forgotten. I heard about the Ostrich Society.
There is an Ostrich Society too. It's a different bird.
Okay. Well, we've talked about how this thing got started, their characteristics and their contributions as we see it. And obviously, having rubbed shoulders and everything else with these guys, it had an impact on our practice as it formed. And I'd appreciate if you'd talk about how it impacted yours.
Well, one of the things that I was hit by was the importance of making sure that we learned the client's language. that we don't become overly wedded to our language and expect the client to learn our language. And I think that was something that was significant in terms of the way I had approached my practice. I think that the other thing that I felt, and I mentioned this to a group yesterday, I took a little bit different route. I got a doctorate in business administration, but why I liked it, and the reason why I pursued it was my need to understand some of the other professions. And I really started to realize how much people really didn't think like me. I mean, you know, it was one of the things from NTL was you got this feeling that we're all the same. Mm-hmm. And I really began to believe that until I realized how many different modes of thinking there were and how much everyone contributed. It was just in a different way. And so I have to say I've been very heavily impacted by the multicular process and the need to be inclusive. The other thing that he really looked for, in my opinion, was the importance of the internal-external partnership. And one of the things I think it speaks to his desire to continue to learn was a lot of people write books on how successful they've been. He actually wrote a book about his World Bank failure. He was consulting at the World Bank and the major initiative and how it failed. And I think that has encouraged me to be able to ask questions about how could I have done it better instead of always touting, you know, that I did a perfect intervention. Because I really haven't, and most of us will admit that no matter how good we are, there's something we could have done a little bit better. And I think the other focal point I would say is that he did have a lot of ideas, but he really saw the importance of follow-up. He may not have done it to himself personally,
not himself,
but he was very good at delegating to others. And so I think that my attention has been more on follow-up and execution, not the lethal kind, but the kind that says, let's make sure we actually get it done.
Yeah.
So those are some of my observations.
You know, I just reflected on something. This has to do with his funeral. Gordon valued creativity, and he liked people to be creative and to do their thing, okay? And so he told his very, very close friends, Warren Schmidt, who used to be at UCLA, and also Jerry Harvey from the George Washington University. He told them before he died, I want you guys to design my funeral, okay? And be creative. And this story came from both Warren and you've heard this
yes,
too,
yes, I
I'm
have.
sure you have. And you were there, I wasn't, because I was in Hawaii at the time. And so Warren says, okay, I'll do this, Gordon. And so I think it was several weeks later, they get a letter from Gordon. And in the letter is an absolute prescription for the entire ceremony, including the length of the extension cords that will fit down the church aisle
For the comments.
for the comments from people and how many microphones
Yes.
and the whole thing. You would have been proud, Joanne. I just remembered that. Yeah, and they laughed at me. We've laughed about that over the years. I know, because that was Gordon, vintage Gordon. And I'm using that as kind of a stepping stone into how he informed my practice. And I'm going to read down through. It took me less than a minute to write these because they're so real. I was sitting in Mexico on the computer. This whole thing came out in like less than 10 minutes, the whole thing. All this stuff that we're talking about. And I emailed to Mary, and she emailed back more stuff, and we're, you know, that's how this all happened. We didn't even talk to each other directly. But here's what I learned, and what I think I've been doing in my practice for many, many years. Know your client's business, not only the language and the words, but know the business, cultural characteristics, priorities, constraints, and closet skeletons.
Mm-hmm.
Leave your client stronger because you've been there. when engaged in organizational change.